I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I just sat there, listening to my own son tell me I was too old, too out of touch, too much of a liability to keep running the business I'd built from nothing. The meeting room felt colder than usual that Tuesday morning. Maybe it was the Vancouver rain drumming against the windows, or maybe it was the way Derek looked at me across that polished boardroom table like I was already gone, already erased from the company I'd spent 40 years building. "Dad," he said, and there was this practiced sympathy in his voice that made my chest tighten. "We all appreciate everything you've done, but the industry has changed. Customers want modern experiences, not this." He gestured vaguely at the quarterly reports in front of him. Reports I hadn't been copied on. Reports for a meeting I hadn't been invited to until Claire called me at 6 that morning, her voice shaking. "Derek's planning something," she'd whispered. "Please come to the office. 9 a.m. Conference room B." So here I sat, in my worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, looking around at the faces of people I'd hired, people I'd mentored, people who wouldn't meet my eyes. My name is Robert McLeod. I'm 64 years old. To most people, I'm the guy who owns McLeod's Family Restaurant on East Hastings, a decent place, nothing fancy, where the portions are generous and the coffee's always hot. I drive a 15-year-old Ford pickup with a dent in the passenger door. I shop at Costco. I wear the same jacket I bought in 2008. What people don't know, what my son Derek apparently didn't know, is that McLeod's Family Restaurant is just the smallest piece of a much larger picture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. "The numbers don't lie," Derek continued, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation I'd never seen before. "Our flagship location is underperforming. Revenue is down 12% year over year. Customer satisfaction ratings are at an all-time low. And frankly, Dad, the market data shows that consumers in the 2.5 to 4.5 demographic don't connect with the aesthetic we're presenting." Vanessa, Derek's wife, sat beside him in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She nodded along, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on her phone, probably scheduling her next Instagram post. I'd noticed the changes in Derek over the past 5 years. The MBA from Queen's University had polished away the rough edges of the kid who used to help me flip burgers on Saturday mornings. Marriage to Vanessa had completed the transformation. These days, he drove a BMW M5, wore watches worth more than some people's cars, and talked constantly about disruption and market positioning and brand optimization. I'd paid for that MBA. I'd written the check for $120,000 without blinking. I'd given him a position in the company, thinking he'd work his way up, learn the business from the ground floor like I had. Instead, he'd spent 3 years in strategic planning, which seemed to mostly involve expensive consultants and lunch meetings at restaurants far fancier than ours. "So what are you proposing?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Derek exchanged a glance with Vanessa, then with Marcus Chen, our CFO. Marcus, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We think it's time for a leadership transition," Derek said. "You've earned your retirement, Dad. You should be enjoying life, not grinding away at a struggling business. We can offer you a generous severance package." Severance? The word tasted bitter. "From my own company? From a company that needs new direction," Vanessa interjected, her voice honey-sweet. "Derek has a vision. Partnerships with food delivery apps, social media marketing campaigns, a complete rebrand. But we need decisiveness. We need someone who understands modern consumers." She said it like I was a dinosaur, some relic who couldn't figure out how to use Instagram. "What about the rest of the board?" I asked. "This is the board, Dad." Derek gestured around the table. "Marcus, you know, Vanessa joined last year as director of marketing. And we've brought in Jennifer Wu," he nodded at a woman I'd never met, probably late 30s, all sharp angles and sharper suit as an external consultant to provide objective analysis. "Objective analysis," I repeated slowly. Jennifer cleared her throat. "Mr. McLeod, I've reviewed the financials extensively. The business model is outdated. The location is adequate, but the property value has appreciated significantly. You could sell, retire comfortably." "I don't want to retire." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Derek sighed, running a hand through his styled hair. Dad, please don't make this difficult. We've already discussed this with our lawyers. The company structure allows for a majority vote to change leadership. I hold 40%. Vanessa has 10% through her position. Marcus has agreed to support the transition. Have you, Marcus? I turned to look at the man I'd hired 12 years ago, straight out of university, when no one else would take a chance on him. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. I think Derek has some good ideas, Robert. Maybe it is time to let the next generation take over. I nodded slowly. And you all agree with this? They did. Every single one of them. Fine, I said. Derek blinked. Fine? Fine. We'll discuss terms. But I want everything in writing. Full disclosure of assets, complete financial audit, proper legal documentation. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. The relief on Derek's face was almost painful to watch. He actually smiled, like I'd just given him a gift. Of course, Dad. Whatever you need. Jennifer can coordinate with your lawyer. I'll be using Thompson and Associates, I said. Martin Thompson. Vanessa wrinkled her nose. Isn't he that old guy who does wills and real estate closings? He's my lawyer, I said simply. If you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. As I walked toward the door, I heard Derek whisper to Vanessa, loud enough for me to hear. See? Easier than we thought. He knows he's beat. I kept walking. My pickup truck was parked in the staff lot, between Derek's BMW and Vanessa's Mercedes SUV. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, rain pattering on the roof, and pulled out my phone. The first call was to Martin Thompson. Martin, it's Robert. I need you to pull the corporate documents for McLeod's family restaurant. All of them. And I need you to prepare documentation for a full asset disclosure. Robert? What's going on? My son just tried to force me into retirement. There was a pause. Did he now? He seems to think he owns 40% of the company. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Martin started laughing. Oh, Robert. Oh, this is... Does he not know? Apparently not. What about the others? The properties? The holdings? I kept it quiet, Martin. You know that. Just like we discussed 30 years ago. So he thinks McLeod's family restaurant is... What, the whole operation? Seems that way. What do you want to do? I watched the rain slide down the windshield. Exactly what I said. Full disclosure. Complete transparency. Let's show them everything. Robert, are you sure? This is your son. That's why I'm doing it. He needs to learn something. Something I should have taught him a long time ago. The second call was to Claire. She answered on the first ring. Dad, what happened? Did they did exactly what you warned me about. Thank you for the heads up. I'm so sorry. I tried to talk to Derek, but he wouldn't listen. He thinks you're just being stubborn, that you don't understand modern business. It's all right, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. What are you going to do? The right thing. Finally. That night, I sat in my small apartment above a bakery in East Vancouver, the same apartment I'd lived in for 20 years, and thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. People assumed I was poor. I understood that. I drove an old truck. I wore simple clothes. I lived in a modest one-bedroom with furniture from IKEA. When I went out, it was to Tim Hortons, not Starbucks. I shopped at No Frills, clipped coupons, bought day-old bread. But there was a reason for all of that. I'd grown up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, in a house where we sometimes had to choose between heat and food. My father worked in the coal mines until they closed, then couldn't find steady work. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families and came home with her hands cracked and bleeding from chemicals. I was 17 when I left home with $300 and a promise to myself I would never be poor again. But I would never forget what it felt like. I came to Vancouver in 1978 with nothing. I worked as a dishwasher, then a line cook, then a sous chef. I saved every penny. In 1983, I bought my first restaurant, a failing breakfast place in a rough neighborhood, for $47,000. I renamed it McLeod's Family Restaurant. That's the story everyone knows. What they don't know is what happened next. I worked that restaurant 7 days a week. I slept on a cot in the back office. I learned everything about the business, not just cooking, but the numbers, the operations, the real estate, and I started noticing something. The building next to my restaurant went up for sale. A small commercial property, nothing special, but I saw potential. I scraped together a down payment, bought it, renovated it, and leased it to a pharmacy. The rent covered my mortgage, and then some. I did it again 2 years later, and again, and again. By 1990, I owned 6 properties. By 2000, I owned 23. By 2010, 41. Now, in 2024, I owned 52 commercial properties across British Columbia and Alberta. Restaurants, retail spaces, office buildings, mixed-use developments. McLeod's Family Restaurant was just one piece of a portfolio worth $73 million Canadian dollars. But I'd never told anyone. Not my friends, not my extended family, and clearly not my children. I had my reasons. I'd watched what money did to people. I'd seen families torn apart by inheritance fights. I'd seen children of wealthy parents grow up entitled, disconnected from reality, unable to appreciate what they had because they'd never struggled for anything. I didn't want that for Derek and Claire, so I'd raised them middle class. We lived in a regular house in East Van. They went to public school. They had jobs in high school, Derek at Canadian Tire, Claire at the library. I told them we were comfortable but not rich. I told them the restaurant did okay, but money was tight sometimes. I gave them enough to be secure, but not enough to be spoiled. Or so I'd thought. Somewhere along the way, Derek had decided that comfortable meant struggling. He developed this chip on his shoulder about money, this determination to be successful, to prove himself. The MBA, the fancy job titles, the expensive lifestyle, it was all a reaction to growing up, thinking we were barely scraping by. And I'd let it happen. I'd thought he was just ambitious. I'd thought he'd grow out of it. I'd been wrong. The next morning, I met Martin Thompson at his office in downtown Vancouver. He was 73 years old, mostly retired, but he'd been my lawyer for 35 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. I pulled everything, he said, spreading documents across his desk. Corporate structure, property deeds, holding companies, the works. Robert, you're sure about this? Once you open this box? I'm sure. Derek's going to be. Well, shocked is an understatement. Good, he needs to be. Martin shook his head. You know, in all my years practicing law, I've never seen someone hide their wealth this successfully. Most rich people can't help but show off. But you're living in a $1,200 a month apartment when you could afford any mansion in Shaughnessy. I don't need a mansion. No, you don't. But Robert, can I ask you something? Why now? Why reveal everything now? I looked out his window at the Vancouver skyline, gray clouds rolling in from the ocean. Because Derek's not learning. He thinks success means expensive cars and fancy restaurants and looking down on people who don't have what he has. He's become exactly the kind of person I never wanted him to be. And you think humbling him will fix that? I think showing him the truth might. Or it might not. But I can't enable this anymore. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Same conference room, same people, plus our lawyers. Derek walked in looking confident, Vanessa on his arm like they were attending a gala. He wore a suit that probably cost $3,000. She wore heels that clicked sharply on the floor. Dad, Derek said, extending his hand. I'm glad we could resolve this amicably. I shook his hand. It was soft, uncalloused. When had my son stopped working with his hands? Let's get started, I said. Jennifer Wu opened her laptop. I've prepared the transition documents. Mr. McLeod Sr. will receive a severance package of $250,000, paid out over 3 years. He'll retain a symbolic 5% stake in McLeod's Family Restaurant as founder emeritus, but with no voting rights or operational authority. I'm sorry, Martin interrupted, but I think there's been a misunderstanding about the corporate structure. Derek frowned. What misunderstanding? Well, you stated that you own 40% of McLeod's Family Restaurant, correct? Correct. Dad gave me shares as part of my compensation package. Yes, he did. 40% of McLeod's Family Restaurant Incorporated, but that's not the full picture. Martin opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. McLeod's Family Restaurant Incorporated is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of McLeod Holdings Limited. and McLeod Holdings Limited is the parent company of 51 other subsidiary corporations. The room went quiet. What? Derek's voice came out strangled. Your father owns 52 commercial properties across British Columbia and Alberta. The restaurant on East Hastings represents approximately 1.9% of the total corporate assets. Vanessa's face had gone pale. That's not possible. We've seen the financials. You've seen the financials for one subsidiary, Martin said calmly. Not the holding company. Derek turned to me. Dad, what is he talking about? I met my son's eyes. I'm talking about the business I actually built. While you were focused on the restaurant, I owned the entire block. I owned the building across the street. I owned half the commercial real estate in East Vancouver. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that piece of junk truck. I live within my means, I said. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Jennifer Wu had recovered her composure. Mr. McLeod, are you saying that your total net worth is $73 million, Martin said. Give or take, depending on current property valuations. Derek made a sound like he'd been punched. Vanessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping back. This doesn't change anything. Derek still owns 40% of one restaurant, Martin said, which generates roughly $800,000 in annual revenue. Meanwhile, the holding company generates approximately $6.2 million annually in rental income alone. Dad, Derek's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to learn the value of work. I wanted you to understand what it means to build something from nothing. I wanted you to respect people regardless of how much money they had or what they looked like. I do respect. Do you? I leaned forward. Yesterday, you stood in this room and called me a liability. You said I was out of touch. You said I didn't understand modern consumers. All because I don't dress the way you think a successful person should dress. I didn't mean, you meant every word. And Vanessa here, I glanced at my daughter-in-law. She wrinkled her nose at my lawyer because he seemed old. Meanwhile, Martin Thompson has managed to structure my holdings in a way that saved me millions in taxes over the years. But he doesn't look impressive enough for you, does he? Vanessa's cheeks flushed red. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. Martin is going to present you with a complete asset disclosure. As requested, you're going to see every property, every corporation, every dollar. And then you're going to understand exactly how little of my business you actually control. But Dad, I'm your son. Exactly. You're my son, which is why I'm going to teach you something I should have taught you a long time ago. I stood up, collecting my papers. Effective immediately, I'm removing you from any operational role in McLeod Holdings Limited. Your 40% stake in the restaurant? You can keep it. Run it however you want. But you're cut off from everything else. You can't do that. I can. And I am. You want to be CEO? Fine. Be CEO of one struggling restaurant. Let's see what your MBA and your modern ideas can accomplish when you actually have to do the work yourself. Derek's face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and finally, something that might have been fear. How am I supposed to pay my mortgage? My car payment? Vanessa's. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're smart, ambitious, modern. You should have no problem at all. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Derek? The building that houses McLeod's family restaurant? I own that too. Your rent just went up to market rates. You have 30 days to make your first payment, or I'll lease it to someone else. I left them sitting there, stunned into silence. The next few weeks were hard. Derek called me 17 times the first day. I didn't answer. He sent text messages, emails, even showed up at my apartment once. I told him through the door that when he was ready to have a real conversation, not just beg for money, I'd be willing to talk. Vanessa, I heard through the grapevine, had filed for separation within a week. She'd married Derek thinking he was heir to a restaurant empire. When she realized he'd been cut off and was now just a guy trying to run a single failing restaurant, suddenly the marriage didn't look so appealing. The restaurant struggled. Derek tried implementing his grand vision, food delivery partnerships, Instagram marketing campaigns, a modern rebrand. He changed the name to McLeod's in all caps, with a minimalist logo. He removed half the menu items and doubled the prices. Customers stopped coming. I watched from a distance, getting reports from Claire, who Derek had begged to come work for him. She'd refused. "He's drowning, Dad," she told me over coffee one Saturday morning. "The bank account is almost empty. He's 3 weeks behind on rent. He asked me to lend him money." "Did you?" "No. You told me not to." I'd had a conversation with Claire right after the board meeting. I'd explained everything, the properties, the money, the reason I'd hidden it all. She'd been shocked, but understanding. "Dad, I get why you did it," she'd said. "But Derek, he's always been insecure about money. Finding out you're rich and never told him, that's going to mess with his head." "I know, but he needs to learn this lesson. And I need you to trust me." She'd agreed, reluctantly. Now, sitting across from her at Tim Hortons, I asked, "How's he looking?" "Honestly, terrible. He's lost weight. His hair's going gray. I saw him at the restaurant last week, and he was actually washing dishes because he couldn't afford to keep the dishwasher on payroll." My chest tightened. "Is he managing?" "Barely." I sipped my coffee, staring out at the Vancouver rain. 3 months. I'd given him 3 months to figure it out on his own. It was time. The next morning, I drove my old pickup to McLeod's, or Macload's, as the new sign proclaimed. It was 6 a.m., and I knew Derek would be there. He'd always been an early riser, even as a kid. I found him in the kitchen, prepping for breakfast service. He looked up when I walked in, and I barely recognized him. Claire was right, he'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit had been replaced by a stained apron and jeans. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "Morning." We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. "I messed up," Derek finally said. "The rebrand was a disaster. Customers hated it. Revenue's down 40%. I'm drowning in debt. Vanessa left, and I don't know what to do." I leaned against the counter. "Tell me about your day. What time did you get here?" 4:30. Had to prep all the ingredients myself since I can't afford staff. "And what time will you leave?" "Usually around 10 p.m. after cleanup." "That's 17 and a half hours." "Yeah." "Every day?" 6 days a week. I take Mondays off." I nodded slowly. "Do you know, when I bought this restaurant, I worked 18-hour days for 8 years straight? I didn't take a day off for the first 3 years." Derek's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know it was this hard." "No, you didn't, because I protected you from it. I gave you an easy path, and in doing so, I failed you." "Dad." "Let me finish. I was wrong to hide my success from you. I thought I was teaching you humility, but instead I made you ashamed of where we came from. You spent your whole adult life trying to prove you were better than the struggling restaurant owner's son. And I let you believe that lie." Derek wiped his eyes with his apron. "I said terrible things to you. In that meeting, I called you a liability. I tried to force you out of your own company." "You did. I'm so sorry. I know you are. The question is, what did you learn?" Derek looked around the kitchen he'd been so eager to modernize, to transform, to make unrecognizable. "I learned that running a business isn't about fancy logos and Instagram posts. It's about showing up every day, doing the work, serving people well. I learned that wealth isn't about looking wealthy. It's about building something real." "What else?" "I learned that I was an arrogant idiot who judged people by their clothes and their cars instead of their character. I learned that my father, who I thought was just a simple restaurant owner, was actually smarter and more successful than I could ever dream of being. And I learned," he paused, swallowing hard, "I learned that I don't know anything. About business, about life, about what really matters." I pulled out an envelope from my jacket pocket. "This is an offer. You can accept it or reject it. No hard feelings either way." Derek took it with shaking hands, opened it, and read. It was a job offer. Executive assistant to the CEO of McLeod Holdings Limited. Starting salary, $45,000 per year. $45,000? He whispered. "That's what I paid myself in my first year of business. Adjusted for inflation. If you accept, you'll work for me. You'll learn every aspect of the business, property management, tenant relations, maintenance, accounting, legal compliance. You'll start at the bottom, and you'll work your way up based on merit, not nepotism. What about the restaurant? I'm taking it back. Changing the name back to McLeod's Family Restaurant. Bringing back the old menu. I'll hire a manager to run it. Derek looked at the offer letter, then at me. And if I say no? Then you continue running your restaurant into the ground, you declare bankruptcy, and you start over somewhere else. I won't bail you out, but I'll also never stop being your father. Can I think about it? You have 24 hours. I turned to leave, then stopped. Derek, one more thing. That apartment I live in? The one above the bakery that you were always embarrassed about? Yeah, I own the building. I own the bakery too. I live there because it's convenient. And because the smell of fresh bread in the morning reminds me of when your grandmother used to bake. Not because I can't afford better. Dad, 24 hours. He called me the next evening. I accept. Good. You start Monday, 6 a.m. Dad, thank you for not giving up on me. I'm your father. I'll never give up on you, but I won't enable you either. Derek started work the following Monday. I put him on maintenance crew first, showing him how to fix leaky faucets, replace light fixtures, paint walls. Then I moved him to tenant relations, where he had to handle complaints and late rent payments. Then accounting, where he learned how to read financial statements and calculate ROI. He showed up every day. He worked hard. He asked questions. He stopped wearing expensive watches and started wearing work boots. Slowly, over the course of a year, I saw my son transform, not into someone new, but into who he was supposed to be all along. One evening, about 14 months after that disastrous board meeting, we were doing a property inspection together in Surrey, walking through a retail plaza I'd bought in 1997, checking on tenant needs. Dad, Derek said, as we stood in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the Fraser River. I've been thinking about something. Yeah? Why didn't you just tell me? About the money, the properties, all of it? Why let me think we were struggling? I'd known this question was coming eventually. When you were 16, I said, I tried to teach you about budgeting, remember? Derek nodded slowly. You wanted me to track my spending for a month. And what did you say? He closed his eyes. I said budgeting was for poor people. Right. And when you were 22, fresh out of university, I offered you a job working front of house at the restaurant, learning the business from the ground up. I said I hadn't gone to university to be a waiter. Exactly. So I realized you weren't ready to know the truth. You had to learn humility the hard way. You had to learn that wealth isn't about what you display. It's about what you build. You had to learn that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Do you think I've learned it now? What do you think? I think I'm starting to. But I have a long way to go. Good answer. We started walking back to the truck. Dad? Can I ask one more thing? Always. What happens with all of this eventually? The properties? The holdings? Your will? I'd been thinking about this for months. I've made some changes. Claire gets 40% because she never needed to learn this lesson. She's always understood what matters. You get 40%, conditional on you continuing to work in the business and prove yourself for 5 more years. If you do, it's yours free and clear. If you don't, your share goes into a trust for your future children, accessible when they turn 35. And the other 20%? Charitable foundation, scholarships for kids from Cape Breton who want to go to culinary school or study business. Kids like I was poor, hungry, full of dreams. Derek's eyes were wet. That's perfect. You know what the best part is? In 5 years, when you inherit your share, you'll actually understand what you're inheriting. You'll know how to manage it, how to grow it, how to use it to help others instead of just yourself. I hope so. I know so. Because you're my son, and underneath all the expensive suits and fancy cars, you're a McLeod, and McLeods don't give up. We got in the truck, and I started the engine. Dad? Derek said as we pulled out of the parking lot. Yeah? I love you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. I love you too, son. And I'm sorry it took me so long to teach you. That was 2 years ago. Today, Derek is 38. He's been working in the business for 3 years now. He lives in a modest condo in Burnaby, drives a used Honda Civic, and has a girlfriend who's a teacher and has never cared about his bank account. He's found real happiness. Not the fake happiness that comes from expensive things, but the genuine satisfaction of building something meaningful. And last week, he did something that made me prouder than anything else. He took his own money he'd earned and saved from his $45,000 a year salary, which has since grown to $78,000 based on his performance. And he bought a small property in East Vancouver, a rundown building that needs work. "I'm going to renovate it," he told me. "Turn it into affordable housing for low-income families. Not to make a profit, to give back." "Where'd you learn to do that?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. He smiled. "From this guy I know. Drives an old pickup truck, lives in a small apartment, happens to own half of Vancouver." I laughed. "Sounds like a smart guy. The smartest." So that's my story. The story of how my son tried to force me into retirement, and how I taught him the most important lesson of his life, that wealth without character is worthless, and that the measure of a man isn't in his bank account. It's in how he treats people when he thinks they have nothing to offer him. Some people might say I was too hard on Derek. That cutting him off was cruel. But I disagree. The cruelest thing I could have done would be to let him continue down that path, to become someone who valued money over people, appearance over substance, status over integrity. By taking everything away, I gave him the chance to find out who he really was and who he could become. That's what real love looks like sometimes. Not soft and comfortable, but hard and necessary. I'm 66 now. I still drive the same pickup truck. I still live in the apartment above the bakery. I still wear flannel shirts and shop at Costco. But now, when Derek and I have coffee at Tim Hortons every Saturday morning, he doesn't feel embarrassed. He doesn't wish I'd dress better or drive a nicer car. He just sees his father. And he understands that the most valuable inheritance I could give him wasn't money or property or shares in a company. It was wisdom, humility, the understanding that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in the impact you have on the lives of others. And that's worth more than all the commercial properties in British Columbia combined.